So, good afternoon, students, faculty, staff members, distinguished guests. Shalom. Bonjour, merci à toutes et à tous de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui pour cette importante commémoration. My name is Angela Campbell, and I am here today as the co-acting provost and as associate provost for equity and academic policies here at McGill, and I will be today's master of ceremonies. On behalf of McGill University, I welcome you to the inaugural commemoration of the International Day of Remembrance for the Holocaust here at McGill. J'aimerais souhaiter la plus cordiale bienvenue à tous nos distingués invités et tout particulièrement à Judith Nemes Black et à sa famille qui est survivante de l'Holocauste, qui nous fait le plaisir et l'honneur de nous joindre à nous aujourd'hui, ainsi que tous les étudiants présents dont plusieurs sont des descendants des survivants. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being with us today to honor the memory of the women, men, and children whose lives were taken, but also to celebrate the strength, resilience, and determination of the Jewish people. Before we begin the ceremony, I'd like to remind us all that McGill is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which we and peoples of the world now gather. So today we come together to pay tribute to the millions of victims of one of the most dark pages of human history. The Holocaust is a tragedy whose magnitude, barbarity, and cruelty have led us to rightly call it a crime against humanity, and it is our responsibility, individually and collectively, to ensure that this horrifying chapter is never forgotten and that the memory of the victims is forever remembered. Today's event, including the testimonial of Ms. Nemes Black that we look forward to hearing, are essential reminders that we must remain vigilant against ideologies that deny human dignity and that curtail fundamental human rights. We must learn from the lesson of the past and relentlessly defend our democratic and humanist values. McGill is fully committed to creating respectful, safe, and inclusive environments on our campuses, and I want to note in particular our new initiative against Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, which is guiding our actions in this regard today and in the years ahead. I note that hate speech, anti-Semitism, discrimination, and oppression in all of its forms have no place at McGill and will not be tolerated. Members of the McGill community, including the Jewish community, whose strong ties and essential contributions to our university go back a long way. Our students must never deny or hide who they are in order to survive and to thrive here within our campus environments. In closing, I would like to underline that discrimination and oppression know no borders and no limits. Jews, of course, were the principal victims of Nazi hatred and persecution. But let's not forget also that the regime targeted many other groups, including Black people, members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, people with disabilities, Roma and Sinti people, Muslim people, and several other groups who did not fit into the regime's delusions. Let's ensure now that the memory of all these victims is never forgotten, always honored, and let us live up also to the courage and resilience of the survivors and of the Jewish community as a whole to continue to fight discrimination, systemic racism, and anti-Semitism on our campuses and in our communities. I now invite Professor Christopher Manfredi, Interim Principal and Vice Chancellor of McGill, to offer his remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor Campbell. Bonjour et bienvenue à toutes et tous. Good evening and welcome to all. It is a privilege to be among you to mark the inaugural International Holocaust Remembrance Day at McGill. Je suis très heureux d'accueillir les invités de marque qui se joignent à nous pour l'occasion, dont M. Paul Hirschen, consul général d'Israël, représentant de la mairesse Plante, M. Peter McQueen, conseillère de la ville, arrondissement Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, district Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Madame Ita Youdin, vice-présidente Québec du Centre consultatif des relations juives et israéliennes, le rabbin Shmuley Weiss et les professeurs Kaplan et Levi Weiss de notre département d'études juives, co-organisateurs de cet événement. And an especially warm welcome to Judith Nemes Black, a Holocaust survivor, and I'm very proud to say, a double McGill alumna. Thank you for being here to share your lived experience and to inspire us with your courage and strength. We are very grateful for your presence. On January 27th, 1945, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest of the Nazi concentration camps, was liberated. 78 years since this watershed moment, we gathered to honor the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were systematically persecuted and murdered in the Holocaust. We also honor the millions of others who suffered atrocities at the hands of the Nazi regime. In preserving their memory, we are reminded as well of the perils of inaction in the face of anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and discrimination. Anti-Semitism continues to exist in our society, surfacing especially during periods of social turbulence, such as during the COVID-19 pandemic. Combating anti-Semitism, along with all forms of discrimination, requires awareness, education, and a concerted effort from all of us. In March 2022, in my capacity then as Provost, I announced a new initiative to address anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on McGill's campuses. Drawing from the feedback that was generously shared by members of McGill's Jewish and Muslim communities, a final report was submitted in June with a series of recommendations for creating a more inclusive environment. Since then, we've been working hard to transform these recommendations into meaningful action, including this first observance of International Holocaust Remembrance Day at McGill. The observance of this commemorative day will be an important way of raising awareness among our community about Jewish history for years to come. But there's still much more work to be done. Ensemble, nous poursuivrons la lutte contre l'antisémitisme et toutes les formes de discrimination afin de rendre notre université plus forte, diversifiée et inclusive. Merci, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Manfredi. I'd now like to invite Mr. Paul Hirschon, Consul General of Israel, to offer his remarks.
Thank you. Nitzolei Shoah, Chaverim, which is the entire amount of Hebrew I'm planning on saying right now. Survivors, friends, thank you for being here. And let me take the opportunity to thank McGill for this new initiative, which is, from our vantage point, so important, and I believe also from yours. The International Holocaust Remembrance Day was originally an initiative of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. It was adopted by the United Nations in 2005. And we are truly appreciative to see how it has taken root and is being increasingly marked across the globe, including here today. C'est un honneur pour moi d'être le consul général d'Israël à Montréal, au Québec, qui est le premier adjointe dans tout l'Empire britannique en 1832, donc l'époque encore où l'on parlait du Bas-Canada, à avoir donné le droit de vote aux Juifs. Let me repeat, in case you did not follow my broken French. Quebec, at the time Lower Canada, is the first place in the then British Empire which granted the Jews the right to vote. The first place in the then British Empire. It gives me a great sense of pride to be the representative of the Jewish state here in Quebec. Thank you all those years later. The work, though, isn't over. In many places, from Iran even to pockets in the West, here too in Canada, we see anti-Semitism has reared its head. Allow me to say to the survivors and to everyone, we've been there before. We're not going there again. Thank you for being with us, for fighting with us, for standing by our side. And thank you, McGill, for putting together this Holocaust Memorial Day. Yehi Zichram Baruch. May the memory of those who were killed be a blessing. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hirschon. It's a real pleasure to have you with us here today. J'invite maintenant M. Peter McQueen, conseiller de la Ville de Montréal dans l'arrondissement Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, à prendre la parole.
Merci beaucoup à McGill. Mesdames, Messieurs, chers consuls d'Israël, Montréal est la troisième ville au monde qui compte le plus de survivantes et de survivants de l'Holocauste. La communauté juive montréalaise a d'ailleurs façonné le caractère résilient et dynamique de notre métropole. Elle fait partie intégrante de notre histoire et du développement de Montréal. Elle fait partie de nous. Every day, we must work to make Montreal a more open, safe, and welcoming city. Every day, we must fight against racism and discrimination. And every day, we will affirm our commitment to fight anti-Semitism. And we're not doing this work alone. The Montreal Holocaust Museum is one of our key partners and has been working for over 40 years to educate and raise awareness about the genocide of millions of Jews in that dark time of our history. Last year, Mayor Valérie Plante announced that the City of Montreal would financially support the museum's move, which is planned for 2025. The new Holocaust Museum will then be located on an iconic street of our city, Saint Laurent Boulevard, and will be able to accommodate many more visitors. We warmly thank this important institution. Through its work, the history of the Jewish community, its rich heritage, and its important contributions will be highlighted more than ever. Continuons de dénoncer haut et fort l'antisémitisme et toutes les formes de haine et de racisme dans notre société. Assurons-nous chaque jour que Montréal demeure une ville sécuritaire et accueillante. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur McQueen. I now have the pleasure of inviting Ms. Ita Utin, Vice President Quebec of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, to offer some remarks.
Thank you so much. Merci tout le monde. I stand here today not only as a representative of CIJA and of the Jewish community, but as a proud McGill alumni. And it always brings me such joy. I mean, today, obviously, our thoughts are on a more serious note, but it's always with pride that I stand here in this university, and I'm so dedicated, as all of you are, to making sure it continues to be a source of pride for all Montrealers and all Canadians. Demain, le 27 janvier, nous marquerons le 78e anniversaire de la libération du camp de concentration d'Auschwitz-Birkenau. La communauté juive québécoise se joindra à un mouvement mondial pour honorer la mémoire des 6 millions d'enfants, de femmes et d'hommes juifs assassinés pendant l'Holocauste. Afin de commémorer l'Holocauste et de sensibiliser le public, de susciter des discussions, des cérémonies, des conversations et des réflexions sur ce qui s'est passé dans le passé et la montée de l'antisémitisme, et sur la nécessité d'enseigner l'Holocauste, le Centre consultatif et les fédérations juives ont coordonné l'illumination de plus de 50 lieux publics emblématiques canadiens, comme le Monument national de l'Holocauste à Ottawa, les chutes de Niagara, la Tour CN, le Parc olympique et le Pont Champlain. Demain soir, vous allez tous les voir illuminés en jaune pour symboliser le souvenir et la dédication de se renforcer dans la lutte contre la haine et contre l'antisémitisme. As time goes by, we are moving further and further away from the living memory of the Holocaust. Today, we are privileged to have a Holocaust survivor with us who is able to share her lived experience and tell us her story. But the generation of survivors who can share their story is dwindling, and their experience is no longer recent history. Anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world, and the reality in Canada is no different. Canada's Jewish community represents less than 1% of its population, yet 14% of all hate crimes and about 55% of hate crimes targeting religious groups are directed against the Jewish community. We know all too well that a rise in anti-Semitism is like the canary in the mine, a predicator that things are not right, that we need to do more to fight against anti-Semitism and all forms of racism. We need to learn from the past, not just what happened, but the context that allowed such a hatred to flourish. In addition to committing genocide against the Jews and the most documented systematic persecution and murder of 6 million Jews, the Nazis committed genocide against the Roma and the Sinti. Other marginalized groups were also persecuted during this period: people with disabilities, homosexuals, Slavic people, political opponents, and Jehovah's Witnesses. With all this documentation and knowledge that we have about the Holocaust, a recent survey conducted by the Claims Conference demonstrated that an alarming 22% of Canadian millennials have not heard of or unsure if they have heard of the Holocaust, and 62% of Canadian millennials were not aware that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. It is only by learning from the past that we have a chance to fight for a better future, that we have a chance in the fight against anti-Semitism and racism. Ceremonies like today and the work that McGill University is doing and its commitment to fighting racism on campus and working with student groups on campus to ensure an inclusive and safe space for all is what will move the needle forward. Kudos to the administration, to the faculty, and those involved in putting together today's ceremony. You too can make a difference. Help be a part of an international awareness campaign. Join me in sharing a picture of yourself or in a group on social media using the hashtag #WeRemember and tagging @CJInfo and World Jewish Congress. Every individual can make a difference if that's one lesson we learned from the Holocaust, that it takes one person to affect change, and we all have a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Utin. So I now have the great pleasure of introducing our most distinguished guest of honor, Judith Nemes Black, a survivor of the Holocaust. Judith Nemes Black was born in 1941 in Budapest, Hungary. Her story, and that of her family, like that of so many Jews during the Second World War, is one of perseverance, resilience, resourcefulness, and courage. Through hardship, uncertainty, oppression, displacement, and the horror of war, she and her family persevered and found their way to a better life. Her journey led her here to Montreal, and we have the honor, the pleasure, and the privilege to welcome her today. Dear Judith, you told me I could call you that. Yes. You actually insisted. Thank you so much for being with us today, and to have your family with you as well. You do amazing, outstanding volunteer work. You've done so much with the Montreal Holocaust Museum for so many years. It is truly a pleasure to welcome you to McGill, and now we look forward to hearing your testimonial. So I'll hand it over to you.
Standing, and then I may sit down after. Is that the chair?
Yes, you can sit there, and there's a microphone there, too.
All right. Well,
do you want to start there?
Yeah, I'll start standing, okay. And maybe I'll sit down and come back. Okay. Well, it was quite an introduction, and all the speeches I don't want to repeat too much, but I'm so appreciative for being here and for all the effort of McGill and all the people at McGill and all the people who are participating and attending this. Because we know, especially as educators, we know that it is through education that is one of the best ways to fight. Now, so I'd like to thank again Interim Principal Freddie, and Professor Angela Campbell, and Fabrice Lebeau, I guess.
He's unable to be here today.
Okay, well, but I thank him anyways.
I will help.
And for leading this initiative, and they talked to you about how important it is, and it is really through that we can change the world, and that's why I've been involved with the museum. Now, as you heard, I'm a child survivor of the Holocaust, and child survivor means that I was a child during the Holocaust before 1945, and I also am a child of survivors, which is sometimes a double whammy, I have to admit. But before telling the story of my survival, I'd like to share a few personal reflections. I've been involved with not just the museum, but Holocaust commemoration and readings. Actually, my thesis at McGill in 1964, my first thesis, was, it's not in my notes, was le camp de concentration dans le roman français. And even then, I was so interested, and there was very little. But what was also interesting in that is that we didn't talk about the Holocaust. We talked about le camp de concentration. I don't think we even knew the extent and the scope of all this. But in addition to commemorating the Holocaust, we have to remember, as some of you mentioned, other genocides. Our old First Nations, in Armenia, in Cambodia, the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, amongst others. Our museum does have some programs together, as you mentioned, with some of these communities. But the Holocaust stands out not only because it's 6 million, of whom 1.5 million were children, but because it also involved the complete annihilation of all traces of Jewish life, including our history, our civilization, our very existence as people. And from what I hear, I think that Hitler even thought that after he makes Europe Juden-free, I guess, free of Jews, he can then, come elsewhere. Having survived, though, I owe, and I felt this for a long time, something to the victims. As said Elie Wiesel, Nobel laureate, I owe something to the dead, and everyone who does not remember betrays them again. Knowing on a personal level that so many people died and suffered left me with a sense of personal responsibility to my people and to others. We recognize also, as you mentioned, other non-Jewish victims of that period. And honoring them gives meaning to their suffering and sacrifice. But in addition to those, I also would like to recognize and honor many of the non-Jewish heroes who helped us, who hid us, and risked their lives and saved us and fought against atrocities. It just takes some good men, and by men I mean mankind, not just men as opposed to women, to make a difference. What makes such goodness possible? Why are some people immune to the infection of evil? The Holocaust raises many questions, provides few answers, and shows many examples of moral courage and struggles against evil. As the late Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing, to be just standard by. Remember the rabbinic teaching that says, if you save one, it's as if you save the world. I hope, Rabbi, that's the correct quote. And to do nothing is the best of complicity. C'est le devoir solennel de chacun d'entre nous, survivants du Shoah, de rester vigilant face aux signes précurseurs et les actions qui les accompagnent. Et je vous invite les autres qui pensent, c'est pas dans mes notes, je vous invite les autres parce que je pense nous ne pouvons pas combattre cette bataille tout seul. Ça, c'est pas dans mes notes. C'est à travers la commémoration et l'éducation que nous pouvons sensibiliser le monde à ce devoir solennel et combattre les précurseurs ainsi que les gestes associés au génocide et à la Shoah. Cette lutte appartient à chacun d'entre nous. As an only child, and this is a little bit my story, I was born in Budapest in 1941 to a close-knit and assimilated Hungarian Jewish family. I have personal memories, but due to my family's willingness to share and my interest as an only child, spending a lot of time with adults, I came to know many facts and stories about the war years and my family and their friends' experiences. Hungary passed several racial laws modeled on the German Nuremberg laws. Growing restrictions made life for Hungarian Jews more and more difficult as the war approached and progressed. Early part of the war, all able-bodied male Jews were conscripted to perform forced labor often under brutal conditions. About 100,000 of these perished, either in those camps or many on the Russian front, supporting the army, even though they were not part of the Hungarian army. In 1943, my father, a feather exporter, was sent to the Bor mines in Serbia. That was one of the worst labor camps in the German-occupied territory. In 1944, he was forced on a death march to Germany and was finally liberated in the terrible camp of Bergen-Belsen. He was in such poor condition that he had to be hospitalized and returned home only in late October 1945. We had no news. There was no email, there were no telephones, no letters, so nobody knew if he was dead or alive. Recognizing that Germany would likely lose the war, the Hungarian fascist government tried to negotiate a separate armistice for Hungary with Western allies, I guess like Romania did. To prevent these efforts, German forces occupied Hungary on March 19, 1944. The fate of the remaining Hungarian Jews was sealed. With the arrival of the SS, with the help of the Hungarian fascist authorities and their sadistic fascist militia called the Arrow Cross, which was like the SS, I guess, in a few months, almost 500,000 died, either from mistreatment or were murdered. In July 44, my mother and I were expulsed, c'est en français, en juillet 1944, ma mère et moi furent expulsés de notre appartement. À partir de ce temps-là, ma vie devint très restreinte. Toujours à l'intérieur et en cachette. Vous pouvez imaginer l'impact physique, psychologique et émotif de ces événements. Cependant, ce qui allait suivre fut encore plus traumatisant. Later on, I actually make an analogy, and I'll do it here too, of what we see on the television about Ukraine. You see those children, they can't go out to play, they're in cellars, their education is, there was no, of course, online learning, but their education is stopped, and in a way, it is a repetition of what children go through. Ce qui allait suivre était encore plus traumatisant. Following the eviction, my mother and I were forced to wear a yellow star and go into what was called a Yellow Star house, which was a quasi-ghetto outside of the ghetto, where there was no more room in the ghetto. They made these houses which were like a ghetto outside the ghetto. We lived in one-bedroom apartment with over 10 people and very little food. I remember being hungry. As the deportations approached, to protect me, my mother entrusted me to a Christian acquaintance, not knowing if she'll come back or not. I have some memories of this painful time. I remember crying and crying, wanting my mommy, and asking, when is my mommy coming back? Miraculously, my mother barely managed to escape from a death march towards Austria, get back to Budapest, where she secured false Christian ID papers, and the two of us went into hiding. Pretending to be a relative from the countryside with a Christian name on our baptism certificate, we were hidden by a cousin of my mother who was married to a Christian who had deceased, and her neighbors didn't even know she was Jewish. We were hidden by her cousin for about probably 6 to 7 weeks until the Russian liberation of that part of Budapest or Hungary. I had to learn a new name, a new narrative as to where I came from. I have to say the fear of losing my mother again was a big motivator. Never to make a mistake, no matter who asked who we were. I remember being scared in the dark caves with the noise of bombardments above, as I mentioned, as we sadly see today with the war in Ukraine. And we spent many hours in hiding in a cellar when the sirens blared. J'ai vécu un des plus beaux moments de ma vie en octobre 1945, quand mon père, qu'on croyait mort, nous est revenu après un séjour dans un hôpital britannique pour être soigné et récupéré. C'est moi qui ai ouvert la porte et malgré sa maigreur et des changements, je l'ai reconnu à partir de ces photos qu'on m'avait montrées. After the war, having lost many relatives, my extended family tried to pick up the pieces. There were a large group of Hungarian Jews who emigrated right away, but there were also a substantial group. We were, I think, about 6,000 or 7,000 before the Holocaust, so about 3,000, 4,000 left. Many tried to stay, and we were among those. We tried to reconstruct our lives. But it didn't work very well because, as you know, Russia invaded, or at least became more politically coercive, etc. So in addition to the pain and horror of the stories, I also retained an impression of resilience, strength, and resourcefulness. I truly believe that those who survived had these qualities. However, sadly, many who did have these qualities perished as well. Comme des milliers de personnes, ma vie a été changée à jamais par la guerre. De plus de nos vies brisées, la majorité d'entre nous, survivants, avons eu des effets nocifs variés au plan physique, psychologique et social pour toujours. Lost childhoods, upheavals, displacement are just some of the corollary losses. Thus, I see again with a particularly empathic eyes what's going on today in the world, not just in Ukraine, but in many parts of the world where you see displaced and broken up families. I can just imagine what those children and families are going through. Alors que la majorité des gens prennent pour acquis leurs parents, je considérais que c'était un véritable cadeau que mes deux parents aient survécu. However traumatic and unsettling and challenging my early life was, I'm grateful for many things. Toute une génération de jeunes adultes dont la trajectoire fut renversée et transformée pour toujours. Nous avons encore la situation de tant de personnes qui vivent des situations semblables. Now here comes the better part. Although very challenging at different times, our immigration from communist Hungary in 1951 had what I considered a happy ending. With the help of friends, we emigrated to Canada in 1953 via Israel and France. I arrived here at the age of 12. I attended 4 different schools and studied in 4 different languages within a 2-year period. However, once settled in Montreal, we were settled. Upon arriving in Montreal, my mother and father tried to start a small business importing hat trimmings. In those days, ladies in Quebec still wore hats. I attended high school in Montreal, actually across the street, And I remember when this building went up, and we thought about all these McGill students. And I'm proud to say, as you mentioned, that I'm a double McGill graduate with my 2 master's degrees. And I'm very grateful for McGill, for Montreal, and the community for giving me the chances that I had. Initialement, je suis devenue professeur de français. Après quelques années, je me suis recyclée comme psychologue. J'ai eu une longue carrière variée et intéressante. Cependant, ce n'est pas une surprise qu'après un tel cheminement, éventuellement, je me suis orientée vers le domaine du stress post-traumatique. Now, I have been a volunteer. You mentioned the Montreal Holocaust Museum. I've been a volunteer for over 25 years in many different capacities related to commemoration and education. I consider this my solemn duty. I believe truly that remembrance and education are the important way to raise awareness and to educate others and future generations so such evil will not prevail. As stated by UNESCO, we have to remember that the Holocaust was not an accident of history. It occurred because individuals, organizations, and governments made choices that not only legitimized discrimination, but allowed prejudice, hatred, and ultimately mass murder to occur. I thank you for being here, and I thank you for your attention.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that gift. I now invite a great friend and ally of the Jewish students here at McGill, Rabbi Shmuley Weiss from Chabad McGill, to offer his remarks and prayers.
Honorable guest, we gather today to remember the 6 million Jewish and 5 million non-Jewish victims who perished in the horrors of the Holocaust. I would like to begin with a prayer composed by the former Chief Rabbi of Britain, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory. Today, we remember the victims of the greatest crime of man against man, the young, the old, the innocent, the 1.5 million children starved, shot, given lethal injections, gassed, burned, turned into ash because they were deemed guilty of the crime of being different. We remember what happens when hate takes hold of the human heart and turns to stone. What happens when victims cry for help and there's no one listening. What happens when humanity fails to recognize that those who are not in our image are nonetheless in God's image. We remember and pay tribute to the survivors who bore the witness of what happened and the victims so that robbed of their lives, they would not be robbed also of their deaths. We remember and give thanks for the righteous of the nations who saved lives, often at the risk of their own, teaching us in the darkest night we can light a candle of hope. Today, as we commemorate the Holocaust, we call on you, Almighty God, to help us hear your voice that says in every generation, do not murder, do not stand idle by the blood of your neighbor, and do not oppress the stranger. We know that while we do not have the ability to change the past, we can change the future. We know that while we cannot bring the dead back to life, we can ensure their memories live. So on this day, we commit ourselves to one simple act, Yizkor, remember. Before I conclude, I would like to share a thought. The Torah says, Eile toldot Noach. These are the toldot of Noah. Eile toldot Yitzchak. These are the toldot of Isaac. Ze toldot Adam. This is the book of the Toldot of man. Our sages offer two applications of the Hebrew word Toldot: offspring and lasting good deeds or accomplishments. There's one integral element of the Holocaust to which we need to pay more attention. When Cain murdered Abel, Jewish tradition views it not only as the murder of an individual, but the destruction of all his potential offsprings. In Abel's case, 1/3 of the world's population. In terms of the Holocaust, the extermination of 6 million of our brothers and sisters resulted in the destruction of 1/3 of the Jewish people, along with their Toldot, their offspring, their future generations. Furthermore, it resulted in an exceptional void of Toldot, of good, that they would have contributed to the world. Imagine 6 million worth of mitzvot, good deeds, 6 million people worth of Torah study, 6 million people worth of goodness and kindness, 6 million people making the world a better and more godly place. When we say Yizkar, the traditional remembrance prayer, our aim is not only to remember, but also to fill the void of the goodness and godliness left by the passing of our loved ones. This is why there is a Jewish tradition to pledge tzedakah, charity, or a good deed during Yizkar, so as to immediately act upon our commitment to filling the void with a mitzvah. As we gather to remember the lives of 6 million Kedoshim, holy ones, we must commit ourselves to filling the void. As my friend Johnny Jablin, a Holocaust survivor, said last week in the Chabad house as he spoke for a room of over 200 McGill students, and I quote, "If there's one last message I can leave you with, hate is poison. Never hate. Only find a way to love." Imagine this: a man whose family was murdered in front of him in the Warsaw Ghetto, later on in prison in Auschwitz for many years. Only by miracle did he survive. Can stand up in front of a room and say, "Never hate. Find a way to live." If he can, we most certainly can find a way. It's nearly 80 years have passed. We must fill the void. We must fill the void through acts of mitzvos, good deeds. We must do our part, filling the void of goodness and spirituality that was left by the Holocaust, one mitzvah at a time. It is incumbent upon us to do the work of 6 million holy souls in making the world a better and more godly place. Doing so will bring the world closer to the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah, which we read at the end, the culmination of the holiday of Passover. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all of my holy mountains, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. May this take place speedily in our days. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. I now call on Ms. Claire Frankel, who is the Social Action and Inclusion Vice President of Hillel McGill, to take the floor and lead the next portion of the event.
Can the direct descendants of the Holocaust survivors who will be doing the candle lighting please join me on stage? Hello, everyone. Joining me on stage today are 7 direct descendants of Holocaust survivors, all of whom are students here at McGill University. They will each be lighting a candle to honor the 6 million Jewish lives lost in the Shoah. We will also be lighting a seventh candle to pay our respect to those who risked their lives in order to help Jews. Known as the righteous among the nation, as Shmuley mentioned previously. Words cannot begin to encapsulate the grief we as a Jewish community experience when we think about the victims of the Holocaust, many of whom have no one left to remember them. So today, we as a community mourn them together. May we never forget them, and may their memories forever be a blessing. Now we will commence lighting the candles. If you are able, please rise and join me in a minute of silence. You may be seated. Now we will hear two poems read by my colleagues and friends, Avia Cami and Shira Lister.
Hi, I'm Avia. I will be reading The Butterfly by Pavel Friedman. This poem was written in Theresienstadt concentration camp, it's now in the Czech Republic, in 1942. 2 years later, in 1944, he was deported to Auschwitz, where he died. The Butterfly. He was the last, truly the last. Such yellowness was bitter and blinding, like the sun's tear shattered on stone. That was his true color, and how easily he climbed, and how high, certainly climbing he wanted, to kiss the last of my world. I have been here 7 weeks, ghettoized. Who loved me have found me, daisies call to me, and the branches also of the white chestnut in the yard, but I haven't seen a butterfly here. That was the last one. There are no butterflies here in the ghetto.
My name is Shira, and I will be reading Never Shall I Forget by Elie Wiesel. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp that turned my life into one long night 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all of eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams into ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for this very moving commemoration. Before inviting our next speaker, I want to say a few words about the next portion of our event. Kaddish, known as the mourner's prayer, is said in honor of the deceased. This prayer is spoken collectively and serves as an affirmation of Jewish faith, as well as a reminder that no mourner is alone in their grief. Today, Mr. Sam Abe-Mayor, the president of Hillel McGill, is in a period of mourning and will be reciting Kaddish. Sam.
The Mourner's Kaddish is a traditional Jewish prayer that has been recited for nearly 2,000 years in honor and in commemoration of parents, siblings, and other loved ones who have recently passed away. The prayer is spoken collectively and serves as an affirmation of Jewish faith and serves as a reminder that no mourner is alone in their grief. It is one of the most widely recognized prayers of the Jewish faith and is a fundamental custom reflecting life, tradition, and family. In the past few decades, it's become a tradition in some Jewish communities for the entire congregation to recite the Mourner's Kaddish together. Today, we say the Kaddish to honor the victims of the Holocaust, especially those who have no one left to say it on their behalf. In addition to reciting the Kaddish today for all of the victims of the Holocaust, I will be reading it myself in honor of my late father, whom I lost in October. My father was my best friend and my ultimate inspiration for life. Among the many powerful lessons he instilled in me, the most important one was to remain true to my roots, to always be resilient and committed to my Jewish identity and to my Jewish community. Perhaps nowhere is that resilience more evident than when we congregate like we are doing today, as Jews have done since biblical times, to honor those we have lost. Please stand with me now in the reciting of the Mourner's Kaddish.
Before the Kaddish, we'll say the traditional prayer. It's supposed to be chanted by a chazan. I'll do my best. And then Sam will say it in English to remember neshamas. El molei rachamim, sheikhein b'amroimim, hamsei menucha, nechoin al kanfei hashchina, b'mailis kadoshim, utahirim, kazer rakia mahazirim, es neshamas, Acheinu b'nei Yisrael akdoshim atahirim, t'naflu b'yidei haroitzchim, v'nishpach domam b'Auschwitz, b'dainik Treblinka, u'b'shar machanois hashmad, b'avur, shekol hakadosh hazeh mispalem azkaras nishmason, b'gan eden timen chosam, v'noimar amen.
God full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant prosper rest in your divine presence to all our holy and pure brethren, whose blood was spilled by the Nazi murderers in Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and all other extermination camps in Europe, who were killed, strangled, burned, and buried alive for the sanctification of your name, for whose souls we now pray. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shadow of his wings for all eternity. And may he bind their souls in the bond of life. God is their heritage, and may they repose in peace in their resting place. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah,
Amen.
be'alma divra kirotei, v'malik malchutei, bechayon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol, be'Yisrael, ba'agla, uv'izman kiri v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehei shmei Rab amarara le'omei omeyamaya. Yitvarak v'yishtabar v'yitabar v'yitnaram v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal, shmei dekusha b'rchu, le'michol minchol b'rchata v'shirata, Tu b'shata v'nechamata de amran ba'alman v'imru Amen. Yehi shlabra min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom ben Ramav uyaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. I would like to now invite Ms. Yael Halevi-Wise, who is a colleague in the Department of Jewish Studies and the Department of English and the Chair of Jewish Studies, to pronounce our closing remarks. Yael.
We're very grateful for McGill's leadership in launching the very important initiative against Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, which is a difficult and long-term endeavor. And very grateful to Monsieur Guillaume Cosset for arranging all the details of this evening. As someone who belongs to McGill's Department of Jewish Studies, actually right now outgoing chair as of this minute almost, I seem to have a special historical responsibility to bear witness to the type of things we heard today. For me, this matter is very personal. On a regular basis, I don't try to remember the Holocaust. I try to forget it. I already have too much Holocaust in my mind. If I think about it, I become paralyzed, and I can't do what I need to do to thrive in this world. What do I mean by having too much of a shadow of the Holocaust on my life? I don't want to depress you, but if I must talk about this dark episode in the history of humanity, then let me tell you that for me, it's not 6 millions. It's, for instance, a memory of my father standing me up, and when I asked him something about his father, he said, he doesn't know what happened to him. Maybe they made soap out of him. He probably didn't think I would remember. He probably felt he had to get it off his chest. But as you see, I remember. And years later, although I try as much as I can not to watch Holocaust movies, not to read about the Holocaust, I don't teach about the Holocaust, I don't want to know about it. Somehow, years later, I learned that the Nazis were running out of oil for lots of things, including soap, and they used the fat of the people that they burned to make soap. So I don't know, I don't think that's what actually was done to my own grandfather. We know where he was murdered, but that's what it means to be a remnant. His mother, my Savta Vera, a very, very practical woman who I loved very, very much, was my role model in life. She relocated to Israel in 1948 with my father, who was then 13, and with about half of their family who survived, also Hungarian Jews, like Mrs. Nemes Black said. And she remarried another person, one of those who made it through but weighing 25 kilos. And he was full of love and full of positive energy. And I used to worry that what if they got it wrong and somehow the original grandfather would show up one day and then there would be two of them. And what would my grandmother do? So I used to spend a lot of years in my childhood always with this thought, what will we do if he shows up? Well, he didn't show up, and neither did a lot of others. In truth, these are unspeakable subjects. And so I rarely speak about them. And very few people know that I and many like me carry this invisible burden every day of our lives. But what I want to say here is that in a way, we are all Holocaust survivors, whether as first-hand victims, witnesses, spectators, or traumatized remnants. We are all survivors of this horror because it remains our collective responsibility to cry never again. Never again, anywhere, like Ms. Nemes Black said. And never can we leave the people of Israel unprotected again. In a world that still has trouble dealing with this anomaly that people refer to as Jews. For the sake of our children, for the sake of everyone's future, I hope we can all stay vigilant so that together we can manage to be strong and move on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Halevi Wise. So this concludes our commemoration of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I did not want to close before acknowledging the incredible work of my colleague Guillaume Cossette, who many of you were in touch with, who put today's event together, and Guillaume is here, so I did want to recognize him. Alors, je vous souhaite tous et toutes une très, très belle soirée et merci encore de votre présence.